Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about the cell cycle, why it's important, what the phases are of the cell cycle are, the stages, and we're going to describe those stages. So we'll start with this question. What needs to happen to develop from a single fertilized egg into the organism that you are today? Well, the first thing that needs to happen to a fertilized egg is it needs to start dividing, right? Because we are not made up of one single cell. A fertilized egg is a zygote, is the sperm and the egg. That's it. That's all they are. And then, as you can see in the picture, right, it's going to start dividing. One cell is going to become two cells, and eventually it's going to become you. So multiplying cells or dividing the cells is how we get to be who we are today. Babies have less cells than we have. Their cells don't get big. Okay, they just make more cells, and that's the reason they grow. So that's why it's so important for cells to divide. In order for us to grow, in order for us to repair our tissue, if you have any injury or anything like that, you can repair your tissue through that. Also, because cells need to differentiate or they need to get a job. Remember, those first cells that like the one I showed you, the zygote, and the first cells that start forming when we start developing, those are called stem cells. They don't have a job, right? But as they divide, they eventually get a specific job, like your heart cells or your lung cells or your muscle cells, and they have a job. So they go from stem cells to specific cells or that have specific functions. Also, cells need to divide to replace dead or worn out cells, and in the case of bacteria, it's for reproduction. Remember that bacteria, okay, divides through binary fission, okay? So that's the way they divide. So cell division is very important for them, okay? Now, the cell cycle is just a repeating sequence of cellular growth and division during the life of an organism. All it is the growth of a cell or the making of more cells, right? This is the life cycle of the cell, but what it does, it grows and it divides. Okay, that's the cell cycle. The purpose of this cell cycle is to make more cells, right? To make more cells for us. Now, the cell cycle is divided in two parts. The first part is called interphase, and interphase goes from here all the way around to right here. So this chunk, all the blue area here, okay, that's interphase. And that area takes 90% of the time of the cell cycle. So if it takes a cell 10 hours to divide, 9 hours are spent in interphase. 1 hour is going to be spent in the other phase, which starts here and it goes to here. And this is called mitosis. Okay, so mitosis takes about 10% of the time. And so out of a 10-hour cell division process, it would take about an hour. Okay, so interphase, as you can see, is divided into three phases, G1, S, and G2. Mitosis is divided into four phases, but we'll talk about mitosis in another video. Right now, we're just going to talk about the three phases of interphase and what the purpose of mitosis is. Okay? All right, so again, cell cycle is divided into two phases, interphase and mitosis. Okay? All right, so let's keep going. So interphase, right? The first part of the cell cycle, which is, we already said it starts here, it goes around, and it ends right here. Interphase is just where the cell grows, okay? Cell grows, and DNA replication happens. Where is it at? DNA, and copy their DNA. So the cell grows, and DNA is copied, okay? 90% of the time is spent here, and it has three parts, G1, S, and G2. So again, interphase, the big phase of the cell cycle. What happens there? The cell grows and DNA replicates or makes copies of itself. Okay, so let's go through G1. G1, okay, this is the main growth area of interphase of the cell. That's this right here. That's this section, okay? The biggest growth or the most growth of the cell happens there, and that's all that happens there. Organelles are growing, everything is growing, the cell is getting bigger. Okay, so it starts as a small cell here, it gets into a bigger cell. Okay, all right. Now, in in S phase, which is the next phase, okay, DNA replicates, and that's the biggest thing here. DNA replicates and makes copies of itself. So one cell of DNA here, okay, if this is our DNA, right, In S phase, now you're going to have two identical molecules of DNA. Okay, so that's what happens in the S phase. DNA is replicated, DNA is copied. So this is the second part of interphase. Okay, now second thing, G2. Okay, this is another area where growth is going to happen. It's not going to be as much as in G1, but the cell is still going to grow, and the cell is getting ready to divide, which is mitosis. So again, let's just summarize interphase. Interphase is just an area where the cell grows and DNA replicates. Okay, 90% of the time is going to spend doing that, growing and replicating. G1, remember, interphase is divided into three parts. G1, which is the major area of growth in the cell, which is here, and then S phase, where DNA replicates, and then G2, where the cell grows some more and it gets ready to divide. Okay, so that's interphase. Now, mitosis, which is the second part of the cell cycle, is where the cell actually divides. Okay, and it has 4 phases. Okay, we're just going to mention them here. We're going to go in detail in all the phases in another video, but we need to know that the 4 phases are prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. Okay, 4 phases. So, and you can see it here. Mitosis is divided into 4 phases. Telophase and cytokinesis are kind of together because they overlap, and you can see the overlap here. Right, here's telophase and cytokinesis. So, again, mitosis is the last part of the cell cycle where the cell actually divides, and it takes 4 phases in order for the cell to divide. Okay, that's mitosis. All right. Now, cytokinesis, like we said, okay, is just the last section of that mitosis phase, and it's where the cell actually splits. Okay, so in summary, just looking at the picture, you can see that here is interphase. Okay, you got G1 where the cell grows, S where the DNA replicates, G2 where the cell grows a little more and gets ready to go into mitosis, and then you have mitosis here where one cell comes in, and then we end up with 2 identical cells. Okay, so that's mitosis. But what I want you guys to focus on this drawing is this right here. Okay, checkpoints. These are checkpoints that are very important for the cells and during the cell cycle, so that our cells can replicate correctly and so they don't replicate with mutations or changes to the DNA. Okay, the first checkpoint that we're going to talk about is called the G1 checkpoint, and this G1 checkpoint is in the G1 phase. Okay, don't get confused with G1 phase and G1 checkpoint. The G1 checkpoint, of course, is in the G1 phase, but what it does is it checks that the DNA is ready to replicate. Remember, in the S phases where the DNA replicates, so before it gets there, it needs to be checked. So the G1 checkpoint checks that it's ready to replicate. Okay, if it goes through the G1 checkpoint, then it goes to the S phase, DNA replicates, and then once it gets to the G2 phase, the G2 checkpoint checks to make sure that the DNA was replicated correctly. Okay, so these 2 checkpoints are very important. One checks to make sure that the DNA is ready to replicate. The other one checks that the DNA was replicated correctly. And if it is replicated correctly, then it goes into mitosis, where, remember, the cell is actually going to divide. Okay, and the M checkpoint checks to make sure that the cell is ready to divide. So it checks that everything was done correctly during mitosis, and that the cell is ready to divide. And if it is, then it goes through mitosis, cytokinesis, and it splits the cell into 2. Okay?